Welcome to Bad Advice, the podcast where we explore the worst advice startup founders ever received, or even worse, followed. And I'm Yudis Collins from Bad Ideas Fund. This podcast is brought to you thanks to two amazing organizations, Investment and Development Agency of Latvia and the Investment and Tourism Agency of Riga. Today's guest is Suhas Ghante, but more on him after the very short intro. Suhas is go-to market operator and startup advisor who's spent over a decade helping companies crack distribution, partnerships, and growth. He's been advising startups globally on GTM execution and fundraising, helping global companies find their motion and scale. Very happy to have you here, Suhas. How are you?
I'm doing excellent.
You are pretty much known for helping startups pull the trigger on their GTM strategy. I'm using pull the trigger really strategically. You're gonna hate me for this, but I'm sorry.
That's hilarious.
Your wife was such a great resource for
I had no
sourcing.
idea she sent this. Wow. This is a surprise.
I thought for a while, is this bad optics for you? But honestly, no, that's a bad
Hilarious.
hat.
That is a shock.
What's the backstory? This could be an ad for Walmart.
This could be an ad for a lot of things. This is at my cousin's farm outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Love it.
And he's a proper farmer and has a bunch of guns. So we went out there with some friends from Europe. We were doing a road trip from New York all the way through DC, Georgia, Las Vegas, Los Angeles. So we dropped by over there and shot up some rounds.
Lots of hats. A hunter, a gatherer, maybe
Apparently.
COO, partner, advisor to startups that have raised over, is it like $100 million combined? And also, you've been at 500 startups. Is there sort of a common thread in how you choose where to spend your time? And what is the connecting element with all of these things that you've achieved?
Yeah, that's a great point. My LinkedIn is all over the place. My resume is just a mess, but there's a common thread in that I love to spend time with early stage founders, pre-seed, seed. They're amazing founders. Usually they need some help figuring out what to build and how to scale it. I like to say they have the ingredients, and I love helping them create the right recipe.
Fair. And when did you sort of come to the conclusion that go-to-market is your superpower?
hmm Well, so many years ago, I was in San Francisco living there for about 8 years, and several European organizations, government organizations, help their companies move into the US market. The Swiss, the Danish, the Spanish. I was working with them for quite some time, and it was a lot of fun helping international folks expand into the largest market in the world right now for startups, which is the US. And eventually I moved over to Madrid, Spain to just focus specifically on helping international expansion into the US. And I realized it's just something that is lacking and is very much needed.
And how is it looking? When you started and looking all the way back to now, uh, have there been any changes in how European startups and founders see expanding globally?
I think especially post-COVID, everybody is global from day zero. You kind of have to be, you have no excuse not to be, right? So it's less of a pitch I have to make them push to be global or to go to the US as an example, but it's more the default operating system for these founders to think globally, to produce first in English as an example. So it's in any ways it's gotten more easy.
But do you think it's important for founders to maybe test the waters locally and understand like what works, what doesn't, and replicate that?
It could be, yeah. There's many different motions where you try something that works here, and let's say in Eastern Europe, it's much less capital to expend to see if it works or not. And then you spend the big bucks to go to the US, right? So that's a very classic motion, and I very much support that for the right kind of startup that can grow like that.
hmm And from a very maybe bird's eye view, maybe can you tell me a little bit about GTM? What does that entail? Maybe there's a framework.
Yeah, GTM is a catch-all terms these days, and I think it's a bit overused. So, in my line of work, it's pre-seed and seed. These founders are very early on. They may have raised a little bit of money. They're figuring it out, right? They have the ingredients, they don't have the recipe, they don't have a dish just yet. So, how do you find out how to scale your business and what motion to use for your go-to market? When I think about it, it comes down to three main variables. Number one, who is your buyer? Okay. Number two, how acute is the pain?
Mm.
All right. And number three, how much trust is required before the purchase is made? So buyer, pain, and trust. All right. So once you figure that out, in my mind, if value can be expressed clearly and easily, then it's a very classic PLG, product led growth motion. If trust and implementation are very heavy, if you have to go have dinner with the person, you have to talk to them for a long time, then it's a very classic enterprise sales model. Okay. And then in many ways, access credibility is a barrier, right? They won't let you in to even talk to them unless you're part of their group. So in that case, partner-led sales is the right
Mm.
motion. So coming back to the variables, figure out who your buyer is, figure out what how acute the pain is, and figure out how much trust you need before you can sell to them.
Mm.
Usually, the higher you're charging, the more trust is required, right?
Mm.
Nobody's going to pay $200,000 without shaking your hand,
Mm.
right?
And how, like you mentioned, figure out, how does that figuring out happen?
That is the hard part. Yeah, what I said is, it sounds very easy, but to figure these three things out can take some time, and it's more about asking the right questions and being customer obsessed. I've seen many founders confuse activity with progress. And this is a classic piece of advice my first investor gave me. She said, you're doing so many different things, and you come back to me every 2 weeks and you have a million things going on, but what is the actual progress, right? So the more progress you can make to figuring out these three questions, right? The buyer, the pain, and the level of trust, the more accurate you can be in a GTM motion.
Mm. And you're the point of contact for the startups that you helped.
Yeah, most of what I do these days is about 6 to 8 weeks or a bit longer of going through this process and figuring out these questions. I like to think of it as, remember, I do pre-seed and seed, so very early stage, and they're just launching from, for example, from Europe, and they're on a ship and they're going west.
Mm.
If you get the degrees off by a bit, you can end up in South America instead of the U.S.
Mm.
So it's setting the right trajectory at the very early days, and that's why it's so crucial to take a few weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, and figure out the buyer, the pain, and the trust before you figure out the motion.
And what if a founder is maybe stubborn or is not aware of this framework? Like, what's the likelihood of them actually succeeding?
I think they can still be successful. It'll just take them longer. And in early stage startups, time is your enemy, right? Somebody's giving you money at the pre-seed or seed stage, and you're on the clock to get to the next round of funding, which is usually in 12 to 18 months.
Mm.
So they'll still be successful. People still do it. It just take longer.
Mm. And with all the hats that you've worn, and as you as you said, your resume is sort of a mess in a good way.
Yep.
You've probably observed some commonalities between all these ventures. What's maybe one common mistake that founders make at this stage?
Yeah, one of the most common mistakes I see, and this is usually with enterprise companies, is that the founder says, you know what, I need to get sales. I need to get revenue ASAP. My investors are telling me to get to 1 million ARR. Let me just hire somebody and problem solved, right?
Mm.
That's almost always the wrong thing to do. Because at the very earliest stages, the founder's job is to learn. They need to be obsessed with the customer, figure out what the pain point is, how much trust they can build quickly, and figure out who the actual buyer can be, who can sign the check. So if you outsource your learnings at the earliest stages, it doesn't help you at all, right? The salesperson you hire is simply inheriting the confusion that you already have. You can't simply outsource that to somebody else. You got to figure that out yourself.
Do you specifically work with one single person? Do you work with the sales marketing peeps, or who's the within the new startup? Who's the point of contact there?
Usually, in these situations, especially on such a tricky subject as GTM or figuring out the ICP, it's almost always a CEO, almost always.
Hmm.
And it gets very nuanced, it gets very deep. So it's good as a leader to figure out the direction before you can lead the troops, who might be your co-founders, but at the end of the day, there's only one CEO, right?
Hmm.
So most of my work is usually at the CEO level at the earliest stages.
Hmm.
Later on, of course, you bring in your VP of sales, your head of marketing, et cetera, and it kind of branches out. But at the very earliest stages, it's almost always CEO.
Hmm. And understanding that every company has its own ICP, everything,
Hmm.
and you have to be very targeted with approach. How do you define success?
Usually, success is not getting to a specific answer. I think that's a misnomer. I think it's reducing ambiguity. At the earliest stages, if we figure out the GTM motion, there is no guarantee it's going to stay constant after 6 months to a year. It's going to change. And all the companies I work with, all the successful companies I have worked with, they've all pivoted significantly,
Mm,
all of them.
mm.
And what we did in the early days, you would not recognize at Series A or even beyond that, right? So it's being adaptable, but also being in a way that you can commit for the next 6 to 12 months on this motion and seeing how it plays out.
During any of the stages of advising for regards GTM, has there? It wouldn't be bad advice podcast if I didn't ask you, have you ever fucked someone over?
In
Dirty laundry. Let's go.
well, here's the thing. A mistake is not a mistake unless you make it twice. The first time is a lesson, right? How else do you learn? You gotta mess up a few times, or at least once before you don't make the same mistake. So in my life and in my line of work, it's very useful to have a bench of advisors, mentors, experts that you can turn to who have made these mistakes, who have learned those lessons, so you can just hear their advice like we're doing right now, and hopefully not make their mistake or learn from their lesson, right? It doesn't have to be a human. It doesn't have to be a human being like me. I read a lot of books, read 50 books a year. And a lot of the frameworks I get, a lot of the thinking and the way of thought comes from those books as well. So it's always useful to look out of what not to do by looking at what people have done unsuccessfully. And that can
Mm.
be gained from podcasts, from books, from TV, etc.
So you mostly read books on GTM.
No, no, no. That would be quite the boring book to get after.
I mean GTM guru. And yourself, when you were also like a builder operator
Yep.
back in the day. Sorry.
Back in the day.
Did you make any mistakes yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
And did those come from advisors, or did you come up with them yourself?
I think those came from just a bunch of different sources all at once. So I made the classic. I was a founder of a cybersecurity company. We went through 500 startups, raised some money from the valley, and
Just
we no, we were selling a very expensive piece of software, cybersecurity software, mostly for banks and fintech. And I made the classic mistake of basically not realizing how long sales cycles could be
mm,
in fintech and banking. You're
mm,
selling seven-figure deals to a top five global bank. They're not going to sign a deal in 2, 3, 4 months. This will take you at least a year to get
mm,
through all the processes, to have the correct dinners and all that kind of stuff, right? So we were in the process. We were in there. We just ran out of money. And it comes back to no company ever fails because of anything except running out of money and kind of giving up. And so we saw that there wasn't a way to raise more money to keep going unless we got this traction. So that's something that I took to heart, and I
mm.
learned early on that never underestimate sales cycle length in enterprises, ever.
So you didn't make this mistake twice. What did you adjust for the next time?
For the next time, I always made sure to have more eggs than in one single basket, right? To get more deals at the same play in case something goes wrong. Something always goes wrong, and I lean more on other sources of traction.
Mm,
Founders sometimes get pigeonholed into thinking only about revenue as traction. There's other ways. We're looking at LOIs as traction. Another company I was COO at, we just basically got a bunch of LOIs from large Fortune 100 companies and use that to raise some money, right? Knowing that its sales cycles will take 1 to 2 years.
mm,
So definitely learned after that mistake.
mm. Which industries are more prone to like these long sales cycles?
Usually anything heavily regulated, in healthcare for sure, in banking, fintech for sure. Anything that has a lot of risk,
Mm,
either money or people.
mm. Flipping it around, uh, what's maybe a good advice that should be followed? That's common sense. Maybe seems like common sense, common logic, but founders are just s- sweeping it under and like.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the best companies don't get funded. The best communicated companies get funded. So the art of storytelling is paramount for a startup success these days, especially now with the advent of AI and the proliferation of anybody being able to code anything over a weekend, right? it's now being democratized. So now, what is true IP? It is the ability to clarify how you're thinking about the space and to talk about it in a manner that persuades and convinces investors to give you money. So the emphasis on storytelling, on the human connection, I think has come more to light, and founders need to spend a bit more time thinking about that versus perfecting the product.
So it's fully, would you say it's fully dependent on the founder's character or personality?
Even character personality, I think, can be discounted.
Is that something you can learn?
I think it's certainly something you can enhance and consistently get better at. You're never going to be perfect at this, and this is what keeps me going. Is there's always better ways to tell stories and to communicate. But I think it's coming back to the clarity of thought, right? I think that is one of the highest forms of intelligence, being able to distill very complex ideas into a simple, easy to understand manner. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago, at that supply chain company where I was COO and we did the LOIs for traction, my CEO was a very eminent entrepreneur, and he, in a previous company, his co-founders ended up all getting Nobel prizes in economics. And he told me, Suhas, these people that I work with, my co-founders back in the day, they were just like you and me, just ordinary people, just nothing special. However, they were the absolute best at distilling complex ideas into such a simple way of thinking and talking about it that anybody could understand it, right? And that, I mean, for many other reasons, but that was one of the main reasons they got these Nobel Prizes is because they could distill complex ideas into easy to understand, simple tidbits of information.
Are founders more varied? Are they aware that you are like a venture partner, and does that sort of influence their perception? Because oftentimes I hear from founders that uh, advice coming from like VC funds shouldn't be listened to because they have their own agenda. Or do you sort of disconnect the both aspects?
Yeah, it comes back to the weight you give advice. If you asked me for medical advice, I would tell you something and you'd probably discount it because I'm not a doctor. But if you ask a doctor for medical advice, you take his advice very seriously, right? So if a founder asks for advice from somebody who's been in the trenches before, who's been in their shoes, who's probably had a very similar problem with what they're facing and has made a mistake and can tell them about it, I think they would take it much more seriously. So I'd say advice given by a venture capitalist or an investor is still extremely useful as long as that person has been in their shoes or has done something as an operator before. If they've simply just been in finance forever, I wouldn't necessarily take their advice as seriously as somebody who's been in the trenches.
Hmm. You could give me medical advice. You can. I think you're really. Is gaslighting the right word? No. Building storytelling. Storytelling. I think you have honed it down really good. Is there maybe like a big flop story? Maybe from not something that you have worked on, but something that you've observed, like a really bad outcome of a uh, advisory sessions from someone else. Maybe something you can share, like something spicy.
Something spicy. I'm not known for spice.
Or shooting, you
Or
are.
shit. Let's see. Let's see if I can think of something interesting there. But usually, when it comes down to, as in your words, spicy, at the end of the day, it's usually something with founder conflict. In all the companies that I've been with where it's failed or things have not gone to plan, the root cause is almost always co-founder
Mm.
friction or divergent ways of thinking about the problem. And when that happens, from what I've seen, usually one of the co-founders just walks or gets dismissed or something like that. So it's a fact. That's one of the most common reasons why a company fails in the earliest
Mm.
stages is co-founder friction or founder breakups. So when I work with companies at the very earliest stages, I'd say 70% of my initial judgment is on how well do the founders get along with each other. Are these the guys that are going to stick together when it gets thick, right? When it gets really difficult, and it is going to get difficult. Uh,
And do you flag that to them that, guys, you need to get your shit together?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if you don't, you're doing them, mortal
Yeah.
harm.
Yeah.
So you can fix these things as long as you catch it early, right? And sometimes you can't fix it, at least you know early and not at Series B, when it's much more painful economically to fix it.
Mm.
So don't underestimate the power of co-founder friction, of arguments in the early days. They can really snowball.
Mm.
as the company gets bigger and bigger.
And for founders watching, what could be the signals that, oh, there's friction? Because sometimes you are like, you don't see them maybe, but
Yeah, it comes back to communication. If you're able to have a good argument, and I've learned what this means recently, uh, being able to say something and not be afraid of saying something that you know the other person was not going to agree with, right? But being able to air it and talk it out. Many founders, you'd be surprised, are just not comfortable airing these kinds of things among their own co-founders, and they usually come to me and we kind of talk about it, and I'm kind of the mediator.
mm,
But that's yellow flag right there and then,
yeah.
right?
So not only GTM operator, but also a therapist.
I think in a previous life, I was a therapist, or I would love to be one in the next one.
Yeah. Uh, and generally, why do founders keep on underestimating like distribution?
hmm Yeah, distribution is something I've really honed on. I just wrote a blog post about this. Is
Ooh, we can insert your blog post
sure.
link right here. Click.
Excellent. So it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, which is the democratization of entrepreneurship. There was an article in The Economist, and I put on my blog post, where everybody's an entrepreneur these days, especially post-COVID. It's become so easy to start a company, to vibe code. So what sets you apart? Number one, storytelling, like I mentioned before, communicating what you're doing, your value proposition in a clear way. But number two, it's distribution. There's 100 startups solving very, very similar problems. But if you can get into the App Store in a better way, if you can get into a partnership-led sales motion in a better way, that's going to make you far superior than anything else.
Mm.
The classic example everybody gives, and I'm sure you've heard this, is Microsoft Teams versus Slack, right? Slack is actually, I don't know, 10x slower adoption than Microsoft Teams. Why? Nobody likes Microsoft Teams. I would hate that, right? But we prefer Slack. However, Microsoft Teams comes with the Microsoft Office suite. So
Mm.
distribution is already cracked for them,
Mm.
right? Slack, you got to go and you got to buy independently. So distribution, I would argue these days, is more important than product.
Mm. Love. And what's maybe you've seen like a success story that there was a like a distribution campaign or something that worked. For instance, right here in Startup House we have Birdie Chat, and they simply they're connected with WhatsApp now, and everyone received like a notification that Birdie Chat is connected, and now there's a huge wait list, and uh, maybe there's another like something similar that you've observed and seen.
Yeah, that's a great point. I call it the flywheel effect. So when you start a company, you're a very, very small cog. But if you can fit that cog into a bigger cog, right? Into a bigger flywheel effect. So for example, Birdie Chat put it into WhatsApp. Everybody has WhatsApp. Who doesn't have WhatsApp, right? So as soon as you're on WhatsApp, you automatically get access to this amazing new tool, Birdie Chat. So for listeners, when you're thinking about your company, where could you place you as a cog such that you can capture this flywheel effect? And you'll be surprised, it's actually more open than you think,
Hmm.
right?
Do you just uh, again, the Birdie Chat example, do you just approach the uh, founders of the target company? Did they? I haven't
Yeah.
talked with Rollins about this, but how do you just reach them out and be like, hey, we have this add-on product that we would like to work with you on, but can we do that? Wouldn't would for WhatsApp in that particular example, wouldn't it in their interest? Wouldn't they be interested more in creating the product or the features themselves rather than outsourcing that?
I'll give you a real example. So there's a company I advise that is based in Africa, but also works in Latin America. And they give you loans to buy a motorcycle or a car. And with that loan, then you can become an Uber driver and make good money in these geographies. Now, they work specifically and have partnered recently with Uber because they're a small cog, just giving out, small microloans to buy motorcycles, a few $1,000s. But the more drivers that are on Uber, the better it is for Uber, the better it is for these guys. So it's symbiotic.
Mm,
So where can you find this flywheel effect such that this symbiosis exists,
mm.
right? Where is the North Star the same for you and them? That's a better way to think about it, maybe.
And when you actually get approached to advise to provide advice, you see that a startup is stuck, the product exists, there are some users but no real traction. What's the sort of first thing that you look at and that you try to explain to the founder?
Usually it comes down to to three things. Um, I love the number three, by the way. It's very memorable.
Yeah,
People tend to
I
remember.
thought we are gonna reference the framework
Uh,
framework again.
but that's memorable. Usually in these situations, it's something is wrong with either the messaging, and this counts as storytelling, how they're talking about the value proposition. Something is wrong with the ICP they're going after, or something is wrong with the GTM motion they picked. Almost, I mean, I'd say 70% of the time, it's the second one.
Hmm.
The ICP is fuzzy. So if the ICP is fuzzy, your messaging is going to be fuzzy because you don't know how to talk to the ICP. Your motion is going to be wrong. So usually something ICP related.
Okay, that's like a domino effect, pretty much.
Exactly.
Looking forward, what's the biggest lesson you carry with you from all of your work so far? And if someone else was in, like, not your shoes, but generally in founder shoes, starting to work on GTM, what would you want them to know?
Hmm. So, as a kid, I used to play this game called StarCraft, if you remember,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a strategy game. And there's a basically it's on the computer, and you can't see where your enemies are. There's like a fog of war. I would always put in this one cheat code, and you type in black sheep wall, and it gets rid of all of the fog, and you can see exactly where your enemies are. And it made the game way easier. You had clarity of where to go, all of that. So when I think about what I do with founders, it's usually try to be the black sheep wall, be the cheat code to remove the fog of war and see where to go, right? So clarity in where to go, how to get there, and how to talk about getting there to investors, to future employees, to potential customers, I would put as probably number one for founders to take seriously.
Mm. And someone's watching, listening, and they're like, "Oh, I need to talk with Suhas." Is there anything that you don't know? Maybe something that you wouldn't advise on?
You know, I don't really do too much in the crypto Web3 space, that sort of stuff. I just don't know it well enough to be valuable.
Well, figure out the ICP.
I'm sure these things apply, but I just wouldn't feel.
And in regards to like GTM specifically, not the industry, but like from all the lifting up the fog, maybe there's still some fog or in
Yeah,
some areas that you are not fully comfortable or confident in.
yeah. Usually, uh,
Or maybe vice versa. What are the pieces that you're most comfortable and confident with?
I'd say my specialty, and I like to say specialty, meaning that where I consider what I've done and my expertise to be 10x an improvement over what people usually have. It's usually super early stage. It's usually you have the ingredients, you don't have the recipe to make the company, and you're trying to figure out how to scale, right? There's this program we do in Bad Ideas called Launchpad, and it's usually right after a company gets funded by Bad Ideas. They go through about 6 weeks of working with us. And we start off every session with a quote that says, "Look, you just got funded. We know exactly what you're feeling. You're feeling elated, and then you're freaking out, right? Chaos, elation followed by chaos. So when you get funded, allocating the capital is one of the crucial skills that you have to have and have to learn quickly because VCs have given you money to spend, not to save, not to hoard and be your bank account. It's to spend wisely. So if you look back at even at the big companies, Fortune 100, it's what makes them such good companies: capital allocation. I have yet to come across a founder in all these years that is good at all three skills: making money, spending money, and saving money. Making money, spending money, and saving money. The one that I would emphasize for a founder to have is number two: spending
Spending.
money, knowing how to spend $1 million the VC has given you at pre-seed to get to the next level.
I would like to turn the tables.
Mm-hmm.
I will do like a lightning round. I'm gonna throw some cliches about advice, or maybe specifically about GTM advice, and just from your own experience, your gut feeling. What do you think about the statement or the question, and maybe give a short story.
Sure.
Uh, Very topical, very on topic. Speed is everything.
Kind of, kind of. My last name means time, and I think timing is everything, not
Hmm.
necessarily speed.
Hmm.
Uh, it's I referred to this earlier. is if you make a mistake early in the company, in the pre-seed, seed stage, you pick the wrong motion, for example. Is it fatal? Depends on the timing. It depends on you're going to lose speed to get to the next round, but it's not fatal. You can still hopefully make it to the next round.
Is it important for founders to try to get to like Series A as soon as possible, or is that in their interest, or yeah?
I would say in the VC interest, yes, it's good to get it as soon as possible. In the founder interest, it's good to get it when they're ready. And ideally, you're at a situation where you're doing so well that you can kind of choose when to raise and how to raise and from whom to raise, right? So getting to Series A in 6 months versus 14 months is not that big of a deal. It's what position would you want to be in to go and approach the investor. So it's a pull motion that they come to you instead of a push motion if you go to them.
Mhm. Great. Next statement. If you build a great product, customers will come to you.
Oh, absolutely false.
Oh,
If you build a great product, customers will come to you. No, 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 not at all. I would say that ideally, the best founders I've seen, especially in the earliest stages, have spoken to the customers already.
mm,
And when looking at these pitch decks at the pre-seed stage, one of the best pieces of traction you can see is that a founder has spoken to 500 or more potential customers already, did a survey, validated that they want this, validated the pain, and figured out how much they would be willing to pay, right? So that is validated before this person writes a single line of code. So do the research, figure out if there's even a need, should I even build this company, and then go build it.
but how can you just go to someone who is a potential ICP and ask them, would you need this if you don't have anything to show?
That would be much harder about 5, 6 years ago with AI and being able to vibe code something over a weekend. You can just show them a mock-up these days, right?
Hmm.
And go
Hmm.
through a quick 30-minute demo with them and kind of get their thoughts on it. And people love to just complain about what's wrong with their current processes. And I've done some of these conversations. It's actually, they're very open. And if you can help them in maybe 6 months when you have the product ready, they'd be very willing to talk to you.
Hmm. Relevant to you, to your experience, you need to be in Silicon Valley to build a real startup.
Absolutely not. No way. I've been there for 8
So
years.
you would still be successful if you weren't there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Silicon, especially nowadays, post-COVID, everybody's on Zoom all the time anyway. Silicon Valley is a mindset. It is not a location. Definitely not. I give workshops on this, but the Silicon Valley mindset can be exported. And people who have gone there for a few years, live the hype, live the startup ecosystem there, can bring that back, can bring that mindset back. They're not going to bring all of the VC money and the connections, but they can bring the mindset back to their home geographies for sure.
Love, love. Great soundbite, by the way. The best GTM strategy is to just talk to your customers.
I don't think that's a strategy. I think it goes back to one of the pieces of advice my investor gave me at the beginning, which is never confuse activity with progress. Right? That's just activity. You're having 1,000 conversations a month with customers. What progress have you made? Right? Have you figured out who the buyer is, what the pain is, and how much trust you have to build? So
1, 2, 3.
there you go.
Check. Any last words of advice to our viewers?
Stay optimistic. Optimism is a force multiplier, especially in the darkest days, and it is the the sky is darkest before dawn.
Wow, are we in for dark days, do you think?
No, I'm optimistic. I think the brightest days are still ahead of us.
Uh, what is your calendar looking like? Can someone just reach out to you and be like, "Hey, can you please help me with my GTM
Yeah, absolutely. I have a link on intro.co. That's the best way to get me. We can put it in here.
here?"
And
By the rifles, pulling the trigger.
that's the easiest way.
Okay, awesome. And when will we see you next in your hunter and gatherer outfit?
Not for a while. I guess next time we go to the farm, which will be wild.
Well, thank you so much. I personally learned a lot. I mentioned you already before the chat. I would love to shadow you one day, and I think it's great that you're with bad ideas, and you're a big part of why our portfolio companies are scaling faster than they would otherwise. And yeah, if you're first of all looking for funding and looking for great advisors for your go-to-market strategies. Suhas is right here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, and to all the listeners, Thank you so much and see you around. Bye.